In this video we will dive into Vue and Vuex, and actually this video is a part of my full course Vue and Vuex building real project from scratch, where we start with the empty folder and finish with the fully functional application. And you can find the link to the full course in the description box below. But if you just want to start with the basics, let's jump right into it. Welcome to my course about Vue and Vuex. It's so great to have you here. And in this course we will build a real application using these two technologies. We will start with a completely empty folder and finish with the fully functional application. We will implement all typical features of every project, such as authentication, registration, working with forms, rendering posts, fetching data from API, liking and disliking articles, and much more. We will use Vue with Vuex, which is the most popular solution of managing state on frontend, and it allows us to build a really scalable architecture. Of course, all our code will be dry, reusable, and easy to understand. By the end of this course, you can for sure use Vue with Vuex for your own projects of any complexity. Who am I? My name is ekaterina, and I am a web developer with more than 10 years of experience, as well as a professional instructor with various courses regarding web technologies. I did my best to put all my knowledge inside this course, and I want to share it with you. So welcome on board and let's get started. So here I am an official website, vuejs.org, and you can see here Get Started button. There is a lot of information here, but actually we are interested only in installation. So here you can install directly Vue through CDN and so on. This is not interesting for us because it's more for testing purposes. We are building real application, so for this we need to use CLI. And as you can see, here is the part regarding CLI. Vue provides an official CLI to quickly create projects. Why do we want CLI? CLI is a command line tool, which means Vue will help us to set up a new project, then install web server, update our files on the fly, and so on. So basically we can jump inside writing code in a matter of minutes. So this is why I am clicking official CLI. Here I am in GitHub repo Vue CLI, and on the bottom you can see docs available here. So here is cli.vuejs.org, and we are clicking Get Started. And here also not a lot of useful stuff regarding installation. So on the left we need to click installation, and here is the important thing. As you can see here we have Node.js version requirement, and this is super important. This means that you need to have version 8 or above, and 10 plus is recommended. So on your machine you need to install Node.js. If you don't have it, then just jump in website nodejs.org and download it here. I always prefer to use LTS version because it's more stable, but basically Vue will also work with current without any problems. So here, to check if you have Node on your machine, you can write node -version. It actually doesn't matter what exactly version you have. If it is more than 10, you should be fine. So if you get such output when you are writing it on your machine, this means that everything is working fine for you. You installed Node, and you can proceed with installing Vue CLI. To install Vue CLI on your machine, you need to run npm install -g Vue CLI, or if you are using yarn, then yarn. I won't run this command because I already installed it on my machine. And as you can see, when I run Vue ---- version, I am getting this output with the version, which means Vue CLI is working on my machine. So after installation, to check if it's working for you or not, just write in the console Vue ---- version. Which means we successfully installed Vue CLI on the machine, and now we simply need to create new project. How can we do this? So here is our installation, and then here on the left there is creating a project. And here, as you can see, we just need to write Vue create and the name of the project. But here is one important point. If you are on Windows, maybe your console or your terminal does not support TTU, which means interactive console. This means that, as you can see here, when we start to create the project, Vue CLI asks us about some changes that we want to apply. For example, we can check like default features, or we can check some additional features if we need to. So basically, if you are using something like default terminal on Windows, I suggest you to install, for example, git bash. This is what is mentioned here, or cmder. This is both really good command line tools. Now, let's create our first project with Vue create and the name of the project. And here we don't want hello world, but medium clone minus Vue. So basically we are creating the clone of Medium website. And we will talk what is it and about its features in the next video. For now, we want simply to bootstrap our empty project. So I'm hitting here enter, and as you can see, I'm now in this interactive mode. So here we can pick default preset, or we can manually select features, and this is exactly what we want, because there is some stuff here that we want to select. As you can see, we have Babel, which is completely fine. We don't want TypeScript, no PVR, but we want router. This is why I'm hitting here space. And we also want Vuex, so here I also hit space. We don't need preprocessors, and yes, we need linter and formatting. So everything is looking fine, and we simply can click enter. And here is use history mode for router, and we just say no. And now to pick a linter, we simply pick ESLint with error prevention only. And here lint on save is completely fine for us, and we can put all our configs in dedicated config files. And now we don't want to save this preset for future. And as you can see, we selected everything that we need, and this is really crucial, so you need to have your console with interactive mode. In other case, it will be just fallback by default and install only Babel and ESLint, and this is it. And we need much more. As you can see here, my installation is finishing, and here at the end we get the message that project Medium Clone Vue was successfully created, and to start using it we need to go inside Medium Clone Vue and run yarn serve. And as you can see, it's not server but serve. And now Yarn will start on our machine, the web server. And if you don't have Yarn on your machine and you are getting error that Yarn is not found, you need to install it globally. So you can just Google Yarn, and here go to the home page, and here inside getting started, here is installation on the left. And you can install Yarn simply with npm, like npm install global yarn, and this is it. Or for example, if you are on macOS, you can use brew and just write brew install yarn. As you can see, Yarn started our project, and here we have compiled successfully, and app is running on localhost 8080. So we can open now our project, and here is localhost 8080, and this is how our bootstrapped application is looking like. So let's now check the code so we can change it a little bit. So I want here to jump to our project and open the code. So here how our code is looking like. We'll talk about the structure later. For now I want simply to change this template and just see that our application is working. So we need to jump to source, and here we have app view. And as you can see here we have template and a lot of stuff inside, like styles and so on. We can basically remove everything from the template and write here something like h1. And here we can close h1, and here we can write medium clone. Now let's save this and look inside our browser. As you can see, now we are just getting our H1 and nothing else. We can also remove here everything inside styles because we don't use them anymore. And it can happen that you don't have any syntax highlighting here because, as you can see by Vue, we have this .vue extension on the files, which means your editor maybe doesn't know how to solve this. So you need to install some package regarding Vue in your editor. I assume that you are using, for example, VS Code as the most popular editor nowadays, and you can simply install Vue extension there in order to highlight your templates with Vue. So just simply install a plugin and it will highlight everything for you. And as you can see here, we successfully bootstrapped our application because here you can see Medium clone and our web server here is working and is compiling successfully. And now every time when we make some changes here, for example, here I changed the string, we get these changes directly in the browser. So this is the most correct path of creating real applications with Vue. So you don't simply create index.html page with CDN URL to JavaScript, but you are using CLI tool in order to create and manage your application. In this video, I want to show you the application that we will create as well as set up your own API. So let's start with the application. Here I have demo real-world.io, and you might ask what is real-world at all, and here is the main repository. So here you can see on GitHub go things to real world, and the idea is that this is the application that you can build front-end side and back-end side in different language or frameworks. So here, as you can see in repository, there are a lot of ideas and examples how people build front-end or back-end, and this is a clone of website medium.com, and it is called Conduit. So here you can see all front-end parts in different languages or frameworks and also backends here. The idea is that this project has for us API on backend that we can use. It is a public API, as well as prepared CSS and fonts. So we don't need to spend time writing CSS, and we can fully focus on some framework or language. And here is how this project is looking like. So here in demo real-world.io, this is the main page. Here we have a banner, here some title description, here is the list of the items, and we have here pagination. So we can click on different pages and then other articles are loaded. We have also sign up here and sign in. I will use my email here, but basically you can simply register because this is the public API and this is the API that we will use to create our application. So let's check it here in network. If I open a network and reload the page, you can see that here we have requests, conduit production ready IO/API. And exactly this path we will use everywhere to work with this public API. So we are implementing only front-end part and we are binding it with this API. So here you can see, for example, API URL for getting tags, and tags is what you see here on the right, popular tags. And as you can see here, a lot of tags are empty strings. These are how they were created. So this is why here you see empty bubbles. But at the end, you can see some tags which are real. For example, we can jump here in dragons. And then here you can see that we are getting in feed dragons. And you can see here articles which are only related to dragons. Here we also have an article preview. We can click on how to train dragon, and then we are jumping in a separate page where article/slug is in URL. So here you can see more information regarding this article. You can also follow here the author or favorite an article, write comment. You see here tags, and this is exactly everything that we will create. Also, what is important, so we have here a login and register, so you can register an account. Then we can jump to the settings and change the settings of current user. Also, there is new article, so we can create here the article. So we click publish article, and this article is created. Now when we jump in main page here in global feed, we can see our article on the top. There is also like and dislike, and of course your feed. We can also jump in the profile of other users, and here we can follow somebody or see his articles or his favorite articles. And this is all stuff, it is a lot of features, and we will build everything here in this course. But the most important point is that we will build only frontend, and we will use CSS and fonts, and we will use this public API. But there is one problem. It can be possible that this public API will be down, because this is not my public API, this is like made for hundreds of projects, which means it can be possible that it is down. And of course I don't want to stop you in continuing the course just because the API is down. So what is the solution? We need to set up our own API locally. And it's easy to do this. We can simply jump here in this repo. Here you can see real world, and you can take whatever you want from backend here and just set up it on your machine and use this API. The main problem here is that some of these projects are quite outdated. So, for example, if we check this Node Express project, which is the most popular, you can see that it was done like 3 or 4 years ago, which means actually I think that you can't just install it and it won't work out of the box, just because it is old and you get like the newer version of MongoDB, the newer version of Node, so you need to tune something. Of course, we want to avoid this. This is why I will attach in the files inside this video my repository that I prepared with your backend. And I didn't create it by myself, I took it from here. This is this core Knex, so it is built in Node with core and Knex, and here is this repository. So I forked it, and I will simply do some changes if, for example, something needs to be updated. So for now we will look on this project. Actually it was working out of the box, so I didn't do anything there, and let's check how we can set up it on your machine. So basically you don't need to do this exactly now, but at the moment when, for example, public API will stop working, then you can simply go and set up this backend. And I will just quickly show you how to do it. It's not this complex. So what you need to have on your machine is of course Node, and you need to clone the repo. So here is this project. As you can see, I already installed core Knex real world example. This is this project, and I have Node on my machine. So here is Node 13, and here what we need to do is install all packages. So for this you simply write npm install or yarn install, whatever you prefer. So all packages are installed, and now you can start your server. But it's not the only thing that we want, because basically here I will open the source of this project. You can see here package.json. And we have interest in these 3 commands: db-load, db-migrate, and only then we want to start our local server with start dev. So basically what these 2 commands are doing, if we will write here, for example, npm run and then db-migrate, it will create migrations. Why do we need it? As you can see here, in data folder, we have SQLite 3 file, because the idea is that this project is using database, and this is SQLite database. So this is this one file where our database is living. And actually at the beginning, this database is completely empty. And to create all tables, we need to write migrations. So this is why we are running first npm run db-migrate, and it will install all migrations and create tables. After this, it is not mandatory, but maybe you want to load data. And for this, you can use db-load. So let's write here npm run db-load. And as you can see here, we have a command knex seed run. And here in source seeds, we have some files which will install for us some fixtures so we can start working. Let's check how these files are looking like. So here inside source, first of all, we have migrations, and this is what we used first to create the table. So here you can see commands create table and so on. You don't actually need to learn them or to understand how it works, because this project should work for you out of the box. And if it's not working, then you simply need to write in comments and I will fix it. So here is our migrations, and we want to check our seeds. For example, articles. And as you can see here, there is some functions, and at the bottom we have this export seed. This is exactly what creates articles for us. And what is happening here, if we're in production, then we simply remove all predefined articles. So all articles that we created here, as you can see, this is function getArticles, where we create users. So this is just randomly generated users. And here, if we are on development, we have this command, so we remove all articles. And then here with getArticles, we're getting the array of predefined articles, and then in knex articles insert, we insert them in database. So after this command npm run dbload, you should have some data in database. And now we can simply start with npm run dev, our dev server. And as you can see, we are getting a message, database connected, server is listening on port 3000. So let's open now localhost 3000, and as you can see, I'm getting message, so errors and empty array or empty object. This is exactly what you should get. If it looks like this, this means that your server is started. Now, if we write here API tags, for example, or API articles, then we're getting the articles, and it is the same response like in that public API that I showed you previously. And in the whole course, we will use public API because it's much easier, but if it's not working, then you can simply use this URL and run this backend service in your machine. In this video, I want to show you one more tool that I'm using when I'm developing frontend every day, and I literally can't live without it. So let's check this out. So here is the official website, Prettier.io, and the idea of Prettier is that this is opinionated code formatter, which means you just install it, you are doing almost no configuration, and it just works and prettifies your code. So every time when you save the file in your editor, your code is prettified. So let's check how it's working. So here you can try it online, but actually we're interested in installing Prettier. And here, as you can see, we can install it as a package and use from command line, but it doesn't bring us anything, because what we want to do is editor's integration, because we are interested in saving the file and then just automatically Prettier formats for us file. And you can think that this is a small thing, but actually not, because you're stopping thinking about indentation or code formatting at all. So you know that Prettier is doing everything fine, you don't need to write any configuration, and you don't, for example, to discuss how indentation should look like with your team, because Prettier is doing everything automatically and you can't choose how it will do it. So let's check here editor configuration. Prettier works out of the box in almost all editors. So for example, for Visual Studio Code, as the most popular editor, you just need to install Prettier VS Code plugin and it will just work. So here you can check the repository of this plugin, and here is additional configuration for this plugin to make it saving on Command S. So here you can check it for your editor, and hopefully your editor is here. I'm using, for example, NeoVim, and there is a COC Prettier. Through it also works. So after installing this package in your editor, you need to create config. And they said that there are no configuration, but actually it is super small. So here on the left, we can click on configuration files. And as you can see, we just create the file like this in the root of our project. So let's do this now. Here is the root of medium clone Vue. And as you can see, we don't have Prettier file here. So here we need to create a new file, Prettier rc, and it is started with dot. And now inside I will paste my configuration that I am using in all projects. It doesn't matter if it's Vue or not. This is just the same configuration everywhere. And you might ask, what are all these options? You can jump here on the left inside options and check all options. It's not that many here, it's just like less than 10, and normally I'm using only 5. So let's quickly go through them. The first one is tab width. This is the indentation that we will have. It's 2, which is fine for JavaScript. Then here is single quote, which means I want always to see all strings in single quote. Here is maximum print width of the line. It's the maximum length, how long our code will be. Normally people prefer 80, but some people like with huge monitors, for example 120, but for me then code doesn't look that good. Bracket spacing false means that if you have something like this, for example you have const, and you are doing here destructuring like this, and here you have some params. So you want here to get a from params, and bracket spacing means that you won't have spaces inside brackets. This is exactly the same with, for example, objects, or when you are doing importing. And the last one is semicolon. It means that at the end of the line, I don't want to see a semicolon. And it might be not that you prefer, maybe you want to put semicolon on every line, then you can just put it to true and nothing will break. But actually there are only 3 cases in JavaScript when your code will break without semicolon, and normally people don't try code like that. So you will see it won't break anything, but code is looking much cleaner. So I need to restart my editor in order to start Prettier with correct config. And now let's check how it is formatting everything. So here we can jump in source main.js, for example, and as you can see here, it is what Vue generated for us. So as you can see here, we have not single quotes, but double quotes. We have here also semicolon. And now I will just save the file. And as you can see, I didn't do anything, but now everything is how it was in config. So here we have single quotes, here we don't have any spaces or semicolon at the end. This is it. So this is why we don't need to think about indentation. For example, we can do something like this, and this is completely broken, but then we just save the file, and Prettier in less than 1 second formats everything. This is why Prettier is really the tool that I recommend for everybody, and I recommend you to install it in order to simplify writing code for yourself. And this is the last tool that we need to install, and now we can start developing a project. In this video, I want to talk about version of the Vue. And as you know, or if I can remind you, we had version of the Vue 2 really long time. And now, not that long ago, version 3 of Vue came out. And just to say, this is now September 2020, so version 3 is really raw. Yes, it is not beta anymore, but it is not really ready for production because all dependencies of version 3 are still in beta. For example, we have not only Vue, but we have also Vue Router, Vuex, and all other stuff, and all these packages are in beta, which means you can use version 3 of Vue, but it is still not ready. But of course, after some time, it will be not in beta anymore, so you need to understand the differences between Vue 2 and Vue 3, and they are really minor. And also you need to know how to update your project with version 2 to version 3. So the first thing that you need to check is what version of Vue CLI you have. If you are writing in console Vue -1 version and you are getting Vue CLI greater than 4.5.0, it means that your version of Vue CLI can generate Vue 3 projects. This is important. Now let's check what do you have in package.json inside our generated project. So here you can have two possibilities. As you can see here inside dependencies, you have Vue. And it is possible that your project was already generated with Vue 3. And as you can see, I have here Vue 2. And also all my other dependencies like Vue Router and Vuex, they were also generated, but they were generated with Vue 2, which means here we have Vue Router 3 and Vuex 3. So actually, if you will have Vue 3 version, then this means that here you will have version 4, and in Vuex you will also have version 4. So now let's check how we can update our Vue 2 project to Vue 3 and what differences you have there. Actually, if you already generated your project as Vue 3 project, then you don't need to do anything. You can just proceed with the course, but you need at least to have some knowledge in order to understand the differences. So it's not that much differences. So what do we need in order to update Vue from 2 to 3? So first of all, we want to update our Vue package. So for this we can write yarn add Vue, and here we can write next. And it will add new version of the Vue, which will be the last one, and even better if it's possible. So as you can see now, I will jump back in my package.json, and as you can see, I have here Vue version 3, which means this is not beta anymore, this is stable version, but actually you will see that all other packages that we need are still in beta. So we need now to update Vue Router, this is our router for Vue, official one, and Vuex. So for this I will write yarn add, and here will be Vue Router next. And the same, it will install the package, but in this case it will be beta. So let's check this now. We have here Vue Router 4.0.0 beta. Maybe if you are looking this course after some time, it won't be beta anymore, but even in beta it is stable. Now we need to yarn add Vuex next, and it will install newer version of Vuex. And actually this is all updates that we need to do. So in order for our Vue to work, we need new Vue Router and new Vuex. This is it. Now we need to talk about what changes were in Vue 3. And there were not that many changes, actually 0 changes in the whole course, but only inside source main we need to change the way how we create Vue application. So as you can see, I have here import Vue from Vue, which means this is the default import of Vue. But in version 3 of Vue, we don't have default import, and we need here to the structure create app. So this means that we have special function create app inside Vue, and don't forget the brackets. And now we don't have this Vue config production tip anymore, and I will comment out everything regarding starting the application, so just that you see the difference. So now here we have create app, and we are passing inside our first component. So actually here we had this function render, and we rendered here our app. Now it is looking like this, and after this we have .use, and inside we can pass our router, and then one more use, and here we are passing inside our store. So as you can see, the differences is not super huge. And now we have a function mount, and inside we are saying where we need to mount our application. So this is how Vue 3 initialize a Vue application. So here we have create app function, and then use router, use store, and mount. And now we can remove all this commented out stuff. Now we need to jump inside router index, and here we also need to change how our router is injected inside Vue. So here we don't need Vue, so I will remove this line. And now we also don't have default export from Vue router, but we have here destructuring. And here we need create router function and create web history function. Now here we can remove Vue use because we don't have it anymore. So here are our routes, and here, as you can see, we're creating router. But in our case it will be a little bit different. Not new Vue router, but function create router. And inside we are passing our routes, but now additionally we need to pass here history property. And here we have create web history function, which we exported from Vue router. So actually this history is that we can use Vue not only for web, but for example for mobile. And in this case we are saying that we want our history, so switching between routes, to work like in web. So this is all changes that we need to do with our Vue router. As you can see, not a lot. And now let's jump inside Vuex. And this is exactly the same here. We don't need import of Vue, we don't need Vue use here, but we need here to import create store from Vuex. And now in export default, we will have not new Vuex, but create store. And we are passing exactly the same stuff as we had here previously. And actually, these are all changes that you need to do in order to update your Vue 2 application to Vue 3. Now let's try to start our application. So here I will restart yarn serve, and as you can see I am getting an error here. And my error is cannot find module, Vue, compiler svc, and then package.json. Actually, Vue 3 needs one more package, and as I said already, in package.json, if your project was generated with Vue 3, then you won't have this error, only if you are migrating from Vue 2 to Vue 3. What you need to add is you need to install one more package. So for this we can simply write yarn add, and we can install it with -d because it is for dev dependencies only. And here is add Vue and then compiler sfc, and this is it. So this is exactly what we saw here. There is one more package that we need, and it was not there in Vue 2. Now let's try yarn serve again. And as you see, now we won't have any errors. So here my Vue is started, and we are getting a message compiled successfully. And now we can jump inside our project, reload the page, and everything is working. Also, I want to mention that these are not only two things that we need for our application, Vue router and Vuex. We will also use DevTools. And what are DevTools? DevTools is an extension for Chrome, for example, or Firefox. This is Vue DevTools, so here how it looks like. Here we will debug our state of application and our Vuex state. And at the moment when I am recording this video, this Vue DevTools doesn't work with Vue 3 and only works with Vue 2. And of course they will implement it later, but for now it's not possible. Yes, you can build Vue DevTools by yourself, but normally you will just later install this package. So I will recommend, at least until the end of 2020, stick with Vue 2 and then sometime later update to Vue 3. So actually here we already created our Vue 3 project and prepared everything that we need. And I can show you one more page. Here you have in Vue website migration guide, and here is introduction regarding migration from version 2 to version 3. So here you can read about it if you want. Here are like super small breaking changes, so almost no changes. And what is important for us, you can see it here. As you can see, for now all packages are in beta. This is orange here, this is not good, and actually we are waiting that all here should be at least green. As you saw, the steps to migrate from Vue 2 to Vue 3 are super small. So now if you need to upgrade your project or some new project that you are doing in some company, then you can easily do that. So here, as you can see, I'm in the root of our project, medium clone Vue, and there is nothing interesting in root. We have only Babel config here, package.json and readme. The most important for us is source directory, and we need to look in public. As you can see in public, the most important is index.html. So basically it's index.html which is used inside Webpack, which generates for us our project. And the most important here is this div ID app. This is the place where our application is injected. And also Webpack injects all files like JavaScript that we are building here on the bottom. So if we will open the browser and open source code here, you can see this index.html, and here at the bottom you can see the script where Webpack injects all our JavaScript. So here you can see JS app.js. This is exactly it. Now the question how our application is working. So everything is started in source, and here is main.js. This is the starting point where we're having new Vue. And as you can see here, normally when we generate Vue, we don't have these two things. We don't have router and store. By default, we have only render. But here we said in our boilerplate when we generated it that we need router and store. So router is clear. This is the thing that helps us to make single page applications. So basically we can jump between pages and by JavaScript remove old page and render new page. Store, we need to store somewhere data that we use on frontend. So we just don't want to have our data in every component, but we want to structure them somehow in one place and use everywhere in some organized way. So this is why we need store, and this is done through Vuex, and we will talk about it later. And as you can see, here is our element app where it was written in index.html, and here our Vue application is mounted. So now the next thing that comes, as you can see here, it is app. So here we are using app Vue, and this is exactly this file that we changed. So here we have just template and style we can remove because we don't use it. And what happens after this? Actually, the idea was that we have here views folder and we have about and home. And somehow router should work with these two views. So let's check how it is done. As you saw here, we have this line router, so we're injecting this file router, which is coming from router file. And here I have index.html. As you can see here, we have Vue use Vue router, so we are injecting Vue router library, which is an additional official library for the Vue to work with router here. And then we have an array of routes, and each route is just an object with path, name, and component. As you can see, there are two examples where we have just directly injected component and lazy import to have like lazy loading of the page. And at the bottom we have a new instance of Vue router, and we are exporting here router. So this is exactly the idea how we will do our single page applications. But what is more important here, we have medium clone, which is our app, but we don't have any information here, and actually it should be rendered on / this component home. Why it's not working? Because here when we removed everything from our app view, we also removed one important component which helps us to render the information on specific page, and it is called router view. So we need to write here it again, and when we will save it and reload the page, you can see that here we're getting the error. The template root requires exactly one element. So as you can see inside template, this should be one element. So this is why we can wrap, for example, our code inside div. And as you can see here, I am getting automatically this indentation. So I wrote it like this, then just saved, and now it is Prettier. This is exactly the Prettier what I installed previously. So as you can see, now we don't have any error, and after medium clone we have all this information. And let's check where we're getting it from. So as you already saw here in router, we have two links. First of all, path slash, which means route for home, and here is component home. And as you can see on the top, this is import from Vue's home view. So let's jump here. Inside views, we have home. And this is exactly it. Let's remove everything for now from it and just simply write div and inside home, because we don't want any generated information. Also, one important point that you can see here is that add is an alias to source. And this is like super important because we want to avoid a relative path. Why is that? Just imagine that you have some component and you don't want to write something like this, so you have some strange relative path with a lot of dots. This is not comfortable and it depends on the position of the file, which means we can't simply copy this line and put in another component, which is really not comfortable. This is why we're using only absolute path, which are starting with add, and it means source, which means this hello world is here inside source, then inside components, and here is our shareable component hello world. As you can see here, we also have a lot of stuff. We actually don't need it, so actually let's remove it. So first of all, I want to remove all styles from here. Then here we have only small script where we have export default for our hello world. And also I want to remove everything on the top and just leave like maybe div. We don't need here class hello. So I will remove it and I will close here div and simply write hello world, because this is a good example to see how shareable component is working. So here we have our import. Let's remove here console log, and then here we can use our component. As you can see, its name is hello world, so we can simply write here hello world and close the tag. Now let's reload the page. As you can see, we're getting the same error that we need to have only one element, which should be in root. So I will write it like this. Here we have our div, and inside we have home and then rendering of our component. As you can see, now everything is working as expected. So let's talk once again how it is working. So everything is starting here with app view. And here we have this h1, you can see it here. Now this all stuff is information regarding our router. And our router is registered inside router index, and we are talking now about slash path because we are on the home page, and this is what is rendered, component home. So all components which are like router components are here inside views. And now we are talking about home view. And here we have our component, and we can see that here on the top we just render the word component, this is it, and then we're rendering here additional component which is like shareable because it is inside components folder. And here we simply import it, and we need to register it inside components attribute here inside object as an hello world, so we can render it. But this is just a start. We will talk more how we are doing components and so on. I just wanted to clean a little bit our project and check that everything is working as expected. So here is our app, here is our home page, and here is our shareable component. I hope it's a little bit understandable from the structure. Now let's think how we want to structure files. So you saw how our project is looking like. So we have a lot of different pages like register, login, then the feed of the articles, then single article, settings page, and so on. So let's check how it will look like. So basically we will just write all views like the page here, just the list, and we will have like maybe 10 or 12 of them, which is completely fine for small or medium projects. And the main idea is that if our components will be shareable, so we want to reuse something on two different pages, then we will pack it inside here in components. So here you can see hello world. This is actually our shareable component. So we only move some stuff from our view if it is shareable. For example, if we have a tag list on two different pages and we want to reuse them, then we're moving them out inside components. But you will see it later. As you can see here, this is the URL of the official example of real-world.io, the demo realworld.io. And here is the home page, and I jumped here in sign up page. As you can see here, we have a form with three fields, like here is the headline, then link, this is the link on login page, and then after we have three fields. So this is the form with username, email and password. And here is the button sign up. And when we click on it, here we're getting messages from the backend because we're sending the request. So let's check it inside network. If we are clicking once again on sign up, you can see that there is a request. This is this public API, conduit production ready IO/API/users. And here, as you can see, we didn't pass anything. So this is just empty object. This is why as the response here, we're getting errors. So email can't be blank, password can't be blank, and username has two important things. So here everything is written on the top. So this is exactly the first page that we will implement. This is register page, and inside we have some headline, then backend errors, then form and sign up button. One more important point to mention is that we can jump on sign in page, and as you can see it looks really similar because basically this is like the same page but with different text here and with one field less. So we have here only email and password, and we also have here our validation errors. So we could create something like shareable page between register and login. But I prefer to avoid such things, because when we start to make something shareable, which is not really shareable, like shareable component, then it may be easier to just do several pages, like two, for example, one page for login, one for register, because in other case we will just write a lot of ifs inside, like if this is login page, then we render this and that, and it is just simpler to understand if we simply create two different pages. So let's try to create our register page and see how it goes. So the first thing that we need to do is inside views create our register page. So it will be register view, and here I am writing the name always with the big letter, as this is the code style of Vue itself. And now let's check, for example, in home view how we create our first file. So here first we want to define our Vue file. So here we need to write script, and inside our script we need to export this component. So here we want to write export default, and we're exporting always an object. And here we have a name. And this is also important to mention. So here in the name, normally we are writing not like it is written here, name home, but we are writing something like, for example, MCV, and then it will be register. And you might ask what is MCV and why we are writing it like this. Basically, this is some prefix of the application. We can also write here app if you want. The main idea is that it should be unique, and you should always write it like this. Why is that? Because let's say that this is not a page, but it is a shareable component, and we want to use it everywhere. For example, like we did here with Hello World. In this case with Hello World, it's not clear, is it a component from the application or is it some component from some library? Because here we have simply the name Hello World. And if we write here, for example, app hello world or mcv hello world, we know, okay, with this prefix, this is the component of our application, which means if we are using some library, for example, material design or whatever, we can have here like prefix ml maybe, and then we see, okay, this is for sure a component from the library. And this is really important to write because it just simplifies the understanding of template file later. This is why we will prefix all our names with something like MCV. So why it is MCV? Because my project is called Medium Clone Vue. This is why I wrote here MCV register. And the most important is, of course, that all names we are also starting with the big letter. So as it was here in home, here the name was also with capital H, here we're writing MCV register. After this, let's check what we have in home. Here are components. We don't want to register any components yet, so this is just a name. And now, before, we need to add our template. And this is just to tags, template, and we close it, and inside we can simply write a div with some text like register page. And this is it. We created our first register page. Now we need to bind it properly to our router. For this, let's jump inside router, index.js, and here we need to clean a little bit our routes. So we can leave, for example, home here, but we don't have about page at all in our project, so I will remove it completely. And we will change home page later, but for now we don't need it. Now let's create one more path here, which will be register. And here we have path, then we have name. I will do it like this, register, and then component. And here will be our register component. And here on the top, let's just import our register component. And what I said previously, here we have relative path for home because it was generated like this. And we want to avoid such notation. This is why we are saying here add slash, and here we can simply write views slash register dot view. And we can do the same here with home and just write add views home. In this case, we can simply copy this line if we need and put it to another file. I also like to put here an empty space line between imports of libraries and my own imports, because for me it is much easier to read it like this. So here we added our new route, register, and one more important point is this name. Regarding path is clear, and actually we need here to put slash, but name is not clear. And this name is a really useful feature, because later we will write links to different pages. And you can always write links just like path, for example, just link slash register. This is what we are doing in plain HTML. So we're writing a href and inside some link, for example, slash foo. But here it is much better because we can write links mentioning the name, which means we are saying we want to create link for register page. And it doesn't matter what path is inside, and only name matters. Why it is good? Because you are using everywhere only name like register and not path. And if at some point you want to change your path, you simply change it. And then everywhere you use the name and it is completely fine, and then the path will be automatically changed. This is why we always write here name, and I prefer to write it with small letter. Then it's much easier to read it in template. So here we can also change our home and do it with small h. So here our register is there. Let's check that we don't have any errors. As you can see here, I don't have them in my web server. And let's jump to our URL. Here we will have slash and then register. As you can see here on the top, I have our app view. This is medium clone. And here we have our template register page, which means we successfully created our first page. Now let's add some content to this page. So let's jump back inside our register page. So views, register view. And now here we need to write some markup for our page. And here we're starting, so I can remove this div. And here we're starting with div class, and here will be auth page. And now we're closing this div. Then inside first div, we will have div class container and page. We close this div. And inside our container will be div class row. And we're closing that. And then inside it will be div class call md6 and then offset md3 and call xs12. Now let's close this, and after this inside column we will have our h1 tag. So it will be h1 class text xs center, and then inside h1 we will write sign in text. And actually it should be sign up and not sign in, because here we are making sign up page. So let's write here sign up. Now after our h1 tag we will have p with class text xs center. Then let's close this p, and inside p we will have our link. So as you can see here we have a link, have an account. So to add link inside Vue we have a special component, and it is called router-link. And here we have a special attribute too, so I will first write it and then we will talk about it. And here we're saying name register, and here I will close router link. And inside router link we can write need an account. And actually it's not correct, here should be not register but login. So what is going on here? First of all we have this router link component. How do we get it? I will show you. Here inside main.js we have this Vue router, and inside this router index.html we have Vue use Vue router. So after we're doing this stuff, we're getting inside Vue some components from router that we can use. And the most popular is of course router link. So here we are passing the attribute to, which means here we can pass either path name or name. And we want always to use it like an object and pass inside property name. And I already said why is that? Because here is the name login, and we can always write it like login because we will later create the page where inside our router here, as you saw, we have name. So here we have name register, and later we will create login. So this is exactly this name, and it is name and not path, which means we can simply change later path of the login page, and we don't need to change any code because everywhere it is the name. So here inside we wrote need an account, and after this, after p, we need to write some validation errors. But we don't have this component yet. This is why I will just make a placeholder to implement it later. So let's just write validation errors and just continue writing our markup. So here is going our form. And let's close form here. We don't have any class on the form. And inside we have field set. And here is class form group. Now we're closing this field set. And then inside our field set, we need to create one more input. And here will be input with class form control. And then form control LG. And then it will be type text, and here will be placeholder username. So our input is ready, and actually we can copy fully this field set. So let's copy this field set 2 more times because we have 2 more fields. So the next field set is also input with type text, but here we have placeholder email, and the last one will be type password and not text, and placeholder will be password. So after the last field set, we want to add a button, and here will be button class button, button large, button primary, and pull access right. Now let's close our button and write inside text sign up. And here actually our form is completely ready. So here our form is closed, then we have div, and template. So we successfully added markup, and let's check how it looks like. And actually it looks somehow, but is really ugly, and for sure not something like this. And first of all, you might ask where I did get this markup. And if you will just inspect the HTML on the demo real-world.io, you can see here exactly the same markup. So as you can see here, we have auth page, container page, row, and so on. So you can simply take this markup and use it from the demo website. This is exactly this markup. The next question, why our form is looking that ugly? And this is actually obvious. We didn't connect things which are here in the demo page. So we need CSS and fonts. Here you can see them on the top. We have a link to Ionic Framework, and we have a link to Google API font. And this is exactly what we need to add in order to make it working. Let's do this now. For this we need to jump inside our root in public folder. Here is our index.html, and somewhere at the end of the head we can paste these links. So here, as you can see, I have 3 links. First of all is main CSS. This is demo production ready IO. So this is the whole CSS for our project. So we don't want to write CSS, we want a full focus on Vue. Next one is icons, and next one is one font for our medium title here on the top. So as you can see, when I reload this page, everything is looking much nicer. Actually, it's a little bit zoomed, so it should look something like this. Of course, we will remove later medium clone, but actually, as you can see, our form is looking exactly like this. So here is sign up, then we have a correct URL. Now it's not correct because this login URL is not there yet. And now we have our form with 3 fields and sign up button. And as you can see, we're getting Vue router error here, actually warning that route with name login does not exist. And this is completely fine because we will create it later. So here we added our markup, our register page from the markup site is ready, and we just need to add there some JavaScript. So as you can see here, I'm in Vuex website, vuex.vuejs.org, and this is the wrapper for Redux inside Vue. What does it mean? The first question is, what is Redux? So here is one more tab. This is redux.js.org, and Redux is a predictable state container for JS applications. Actually, for me, it doesn't bring any sense and clarity when I am reading this sentence. So basically, what is Redux? This is the idea that you have your whole state in one place, like a huge object, and then you have possibilities to manipulate this state. The idea is that you can trigger actions, and these actions can change your state. Here is the picture that maybe will bring clarity to you. So you have your view. This is something like your components. And then from your view, you can trigger actions, like, for example, a user clicked, or user clicked register, or user did something, like typed name, whatever you want. And this means that you are triggering actions. and after your actions is triggered, we're listening them in our state, and we can react to these actions. So as you can see, here is the single flow of data. You have your component, you trigger action, your action changes your state, and then when your state is updated, your component is subscribed to this state or part of this state, and then you are getting new data. So this is how Redux is working, and this is super popular methodology or architecture for frontend, but it is framework agnostic. It means that we can use Redux in every framework, and this is what people are normally doing. For example, there is an implementation of Redux in React, then we have a wrapper and GRX for Angular, and here in Vue we have Vuex. So here, as you can see, Vuex is just the implementation of Redux inside Vue. And as we want to create real application, of course we want to use Vuex, because it will help us to store our data correctly, to simplify working with this data, and so on. So what do we need to install Vuex and to start working with it? Actually nothing, because when we bootstrapped our application with Vue CLI, it was already created like this and it is working. So what is the idea? Here inside our source we have folder store, and inside there is index.js. As you can see, it looks a little bit like our router, because first what we did, we registered Vuex package inside Vue. And just to remind you, Vuex is the official implementation of Redux inside Vue. So this means it's not some non-standard library which is just supported by community, but it is official. And we always try to use mostly official libraries, because we are sure that they will be supported long term. So here we have this super big object where we are saying new Vuex store, and we are creating this store. And as you can see here, we have such properties as state, mutations, actions, and modules. Actually, this is what I don't like that much in Vue, that they changed how things are named in Redux and named them differently. So here is something if you are coming from React world, for example, and you worked previously with Redux. In Redux you have only actions, so you are just dispatching actions and you are updating your state. In Vue you have mutations and actions, and this is somehow not super clear for beginners or people who are switched from Redux. So the idea is that mutations are synchronous actions and actions are really asynchronous actions. This is it. Now let's check on the simple example how Vuex is working. So as you can see here, I opened the link here, state, and actually here we have our counter example. So the idea is that we have some computed property inside our component and we can subscribe to the state. So let's do the same in order to understand how it's working. So here I am in the file with store index.js, and here we have our global state. And for now it is empty. What we can say here is that we have some property inside, for example count. And this count will be, for example, 0. And then inside our mutations we can create some mutation that will change this count. So here inside mutations you can see how it is defined. So as you can see here, it's a function inside. So we are saying here increment, and here we are getting state as a parameter, and inside we can do something with this state. For example, state.count++, and we just save it. So what did we do here? First of all, we defined our global state, and this is the whole global Vuex state for our whole application. Of course, it's just one property, and normally it will be like hundreds of properties. Now we are defining our mutations. Mutations are our synchronous actions which just change our state. So here, as you can see, we have mutation increment, and as an argument we're getting state, and this is this state, and inside we can access properties inside the state and change them. This is exactly what we did. Now the question is how, first of all, we can get state inside our component, and secondly, how we can call mutations. It's all written in documentation, and I can say that documentation of Vue and Vuex is quite good and quite understandable. So here in the state, you can see how we access properties from the store. So here, as you can see inside this, we have property store in all our components, and we can simply say this store state count. So let's try. Let's jump back in our source Vue register, and here on the bottom we have just name and nothing else. So here we will write computed, and as you remember, computed is an object, and inside we will have some property which will be calculated every time. So here we want property count, so here will be round brackets, and inside we're returning the value. So it will be this, then store, and then here will be actually $store, sorry. And then here we will access our state, and then it will be count. And let's just console log here also store to check how it looks like. So here is this $store. And now we need to use this count somewhere inside our template. In other case, it won't be called. So we just need to render it like normally. So here we're writing somewhere count, and let's check if we have any errors. We don't have errors in our web server, and now here when I reload the page, you can see that we have property store. So first of all, here you can see 0, and this is this store state count. So this is exactly this what we created. So here inside our store index, we created state, and here is count 0. So we can read it like this inside our component. And what is more interesting is this store. We will use it a lot, and for us is interesting what we have inside state. So here is our state, this is our object, and here is our count. This is exactly what we read, and now with just simple line, so console log we can remove. This is just computed property to access our global state in any place of our application. Now let's add a button here to make a mutation and check how we can change our counter. But we need to do it outside of our form. In other case, this button will trigger the form submitting. So here I will add a button and close button. And here is, for example, increase. And we need here our method. So we will have here click, and let's name it increase counter. Now let's create this method here. So we are defining methods object, and inside we have increase counter, and inside it we have console log increase counter. Let's check that our method is working. So here we have increase, we click on increase, and you can see in console increase counter. So now how we can trigger our mutation? And here we just open documentation. Here is mutations tab, and as you can see here we define mutation, and to trigger it we are saying store.commit and then the name of mutation. Let's check once again. Here is our mutation, it is named increment. So to call it here we need to write this, then $store, and here as you can see .commit, and then here the name increment. This is it. So this line is committing our mutation. And let's check how it's working. So we don't get any errors. Now we click on increase, and as you can see, each time when we click, this state changes. What does it mean? So here we have store commit. So we don't change in any way this state count. So here we just read this state count from our this store. And here we simply make commit, so we're just saying, okay, we want to do increment. So our component doesn't know anything about changing the state. And this is super important because we separate logic of component with logic of Vuex. And as you can see here inside our store, we have a state, and here our function, our mutation increment, changes state.count. And then this computed property count we can create in any components that we want, and they all at once will get the update because they are subscribed to this state.count. And this is exactly how mutations are working. So we have some global state, and for mutations, we just simply say this store commit, and then here is increment, for example, or whatever mutation name you need, and then we will trigger this mutation. Of course, it would be nice if we somehow can see that we triggered some mutation. And for this, you need to install Chrome plugin, which is called Vue. So here, as you can see, I already installed it. You can just Google Vue Chrome and install it on your machine. The idea is that here, after installation, you have a Vue tab. This is how it looks like. And actually, this is all that you need to work with Vue. There are a lot of tabs here which are doing different things for Vue. So here, for example, you see your tree of applications like root, app, and inside we have our MCV register, and we see what router it is, but we're actually interested inside Vuex. So here, as you can see, the second tab is Vuex, and we have here on the left our mutations. So as you can see, here is increment, and here we can click and see the state. So first of all, we can check what is state right now. You can see that counter is 8, and we can see all actions or all mutations that were triggered. So here you can see that payload is undefined because we didn't pass any additional data, and type is increment. And you can exactly see how each our mutation changes our global state. Why it is good? Because it's super easy to debug. You just open this tab, you see what mutations are happening, and you can say exactly what is the problem, because after each mutation you see the old state and the new state, and you can compare them and understand how it is working. So as you can see here inside our source store index, we are working with global state and mutations. It is all nice, but just imagine that we have here like hundreds of properties and hundreds of mutations, and later also hundreds of actions. We don't want this. This is why we have modules. And what is module? It is exactly the idea how we can avoid writing everything in global namespace. So let's say that we are working with feed. So we can create a state for feed, some actions for feed, and mutations for feed, and also other stuff that we will tackle later. So we scope everything which is related to feed inside our feed module. And for example, if we are making now register page and login page, we can say that we are working on the module authentication, and we can create this module and fill everything there. So this is really nice approach to make scalable applications. This is why we will use it. So let's start by creating our first module auth. So here first I want to remove everything from state and mutations here, because we won't use it at all. We will use only modules. And here our first module will be auth, and here we need to import it. We don't have it yet, but it will go in add. This is source, just to remind you. And here we have store, then modules, and then auth. This means that we will create here additional folder which is called modules, and inside we will create new file auth.js. So here we have export default, and here is the object. The question is, what should we export here? So now this is the module of Vuex, and here we want to export our state, actions, mutations, and getters. This is what we normally will export from here. But for now we don't have actions, so I will comment it out, and we don't have getters. So we want to create our state and mutations. So first of all, let's start with state because it is easier. What is state? It's a part of our global state. What I'm meaning by that, here inside index we wrote inside state counter in last video. But of course we want somehow to structure the data that we have. And of course, if we will simply pollute all data like in window object, for example, then it will be simply mess. So let's say you want some data for the feed and you want some data for authentication. Of course, you want somehow to namespace it and split and not just write like hundreds of properties inside root. This is why here we create a state, and this is exactly the state for our authentication. What properties do we need? The first property that we need here is submitting property. Because, for example, when we are on register page, we have here, as you saw previously, the button, and we will hit this button when we will try to register user. And actually it's a long process because we need to speak with the API, which means we want to disable the button while this process. Then user can't click several times on this button and we will avoid unnecessary requests for the backend. This is why here we will have is submitting false, and this is actually our initial state. So by default we don't do any submitting, which means this property will be false. And here we have also property mutations. So we want to create some mutations and register them here. So here we're creating mutations, and this is an object, and here will be the name. And as you remember here, what we did previously in index, we created inside mutation this function for increasing the counter. So we're doing the same here. And what mutations do we need? First mutation that we want to create is register start. Actually, we want several of them because asynchronous request to API is long process and we want to change some data on start, on success and on failure. Let's start with the one mutation, and the first mutation here will be register start. And this is a function, so here as a parameter we are getting our state. And with this state, this is this state, we can work. So when we start registering, we want to set property is submitting to true. So it will be state dot, and here will be is submitting, and we simply set it to true. Now, how we can use this mutation? We can simply jump back in our component here, so views, register, and we used in previous lesson here, we created method increase counter. We don't need this method here, so I will comment it out and remove in a second. And we also want to comment out this counter because it was only for testing purposes. I will also remove here counter and this button because we don't need them. But what we need here is first of all to trigger somehow mutation. So here we created our form, but we don't have submit action. And this is exactly what we need in order to trigger our mutation. So here on our form, we want to have an action and it will be submit. And just to remind you, we can say here dot prevent, and here will be our onSubmit function. What does it mean? There are two actions actually, submit and submit.prevent. And prevent means that we want to add event prevent default to disable default behavior of the form, which means normally in HTML, when you submit the form, you have a post request on your backend. As we are doing SPA, single page application, we don't want this behavior and we just want our JavaScript code. This is why here I wrote submit prevent. Now we need to create our method onSubmit. So here inside onSubmit, we want actually to commit our mutation. So exactly the code that we have, I will copy it now here so we can test it. So here, first of all, we want to console log onSubmit, and then our commit will be the same what we wrote here inside our mutation. So it will be register start. So as you can see, it doesn't make any difference, and we are just writing the same here inside commit as we did previously when we wrote it in global, which means we can simply create modules and it will work in the same way like if we wrote it in global. So let's check if it's working. We don't have any errors here, and let's check in browser. First of all, we need to jump to register page. Here the same warning that login does not exist. This is fine. And now we click on sign up link here. And here we have on submit. This is our console log, and we can go to the tab with Vue to check if we have inside Vuex an action. And as you can see here, we have register start mutation, and here type is register start, payload is undefined, which is fine, we didn't pass anything. Now what is more important is our base state. As you can see now we have auth property, and inside is submitting true. And this is really important to understand. So when we are creating a module, here we have module in index. So here you can see property auth. This is exactly this namespace auth that we created. So this means that all properties that we are writing here inside state are not in the root anymore, but they are namespaced in this auth module. And this is why we're having here is submitting true. So this is all fine, and we created our first module and committed our first mutation. Now how we can subscribe to this is submitting data. So let's jump back in our register view, and we can actually change this computed property. What we want here to do is we want to create is submitting property and read it from our state. So here we simply can write a store state and then .auth is submitting. This is it. This is how we get data that we need from our modular Vuex. So now here, first of all, I want to check if it's working at all. This is why I simply write here is submitting. Let's reload the page. And here you can see false. Now we click sign up, and this value is true, which means we successfully binded our component register to our Vuex store. Now for normal usage, I won't write it just here, but I want to disable a button. And just to remind you, to disable a button, there is an attribute disabled with colon, and we simply apply here the value of some variable. In our case, we want here is submitting property, which is actually a computed property. So let's check if it's working now. We reload the page, and this button is green because the value is false. Now we click on the button, and button is disabled because the value is true. Actually, the idea is that on register start, first of all, we set this button to false, and then on success, we set it back to true. But this is the story which is going related to actions, and we don't know actions yet. But here in this video, we successfully binded our store and created our first auth module, as well as committed our first mutation. As I already said, actions are just asynchronous mutations. What I mean by that, let's jump inside documentation and check it out. So here inside core concepts, we have mutations and we have actions. What's the difference? We use mutations to just change data on frontend. But the problem happens when we have some action which is going really long. For example, we're speaking with API, which means it's a long process, and we can't just synchronously write our code. And for this we need actions. So we want somehow to write our asynchronous call to the backend, and when it is ready, then we just trigger new mutation. So let's check in the example how it is done. Here is the basic example of Vuex action. So here, as always, we have state with counter, here is mutation, and here is action. As you can see, just from the start, there is no difference. Inside action is just a function, but here we are calling mutations. What's the difference? Inside mutations, you can't call asynchronous code. This is super important to remember. It's just forbidden. Inside actions, you can call asynchronous code. This means that we can't directly in mutation write some fetch of data for our API, but we can do that inside action. So here is exactly what we have here. We can write context commit and then increment. So what's the idea? Here is the actions. We have action increment, and as a parameter we are getting context. And context is actually like a store. So you can write here context.commit, like we did previously to commit a mutation, and here is the name of our mutation. And now here we can do this dispatching of the action outside in our components. So this means that we don't trigger the mutation, but we just trigger the action. So here we're writing store dispatch and then the name of the action. And it will start everything that is written here inside this action. So the idea is that here we can use several mutations. Let's write everything here in the real example. So here first we have on submit actually register start, but normally in the real application we will use here our action. So let's create it first. We need to jump here inside our auth.js, this is our Vuex module, and create here actions. So I will simply uncomment them and create here const actions. And this is also an object, and we also have here the property. And here we will name it register. Why is that? Because the idea of my naming is that action is some thing that we are doing, and mutations is start, failure, and success of that thing. Which means if we are talking about register action, this is when we are talking with API, we have one action register and we have three mutations: register start, register success, and register failure. So now we're creating action register. So here we're getting as an argument context, and this is just a function, and inside we want first to commit our mutation. So we're writing context dot commit, and here is register start just as a string. This is it. We can make here more commits, or we can make here authentication with real API, but we will do it later. First of all, what I want to do now is change inside our register view here on submit and not use commit, because commit is a mutation, but use dispatch. And we are dispatching the actions. So here we want not register start because it's not a mutation, but we want here action register. This is it. So once again, we want to dispatch actions and we want to commit mutations. This is it. So as you can see in documentation, we just provide the name of the action. Let's check the difference and how it works. So first of all, we reload the page, we don't see any errors, and now we're clicking inside sign up. And this store dispatch is not a function. I forget here the letter T. So let's reload it once again. We're clicking sign up, we don't have any errors, and here when we are jumping inside View tab, we see our register start mutation. And this is important to understand because we don't see here our actions, we see only here mutations. But this doesn't trigger mutation, this is triggering action. And then inside our module, we're triggering register start mutation. And this register start is doing exactly the same like it did previously. So our state now is submitting true and our button is disabled. But now we have a possibility to write here asynchronous code. Let's try it really easy. We can write here set timeout and write here a function. And inside we can say that in 1 second we want to commit register success. So here will be register success. And we need to create new mutation here. If you will just simply write code like this, we can actually check it, you will get an error. So here we don't have an error, we click sign up, and we are getting the error after 1 second, unknown mutation type register success. And this is what I like about Vue. You always get nice errors and they're like super short and super understandable. For example, here we understand, okay, we don't have mutation type register success. So we need to create it first inside our mutations. So here I will copy register start and write here register success. And we also are getting our state as an argument, and we want here to change is submitting to false. Because we know, okay, when we successfully registered, we don't want to disable this button anymore. Let's check now how it's looking. So we are clicking sign up, and let's look inside our Vue tab. So here we have two mutations, register start, and you can see on the right this is submitting is in true, and then we have register success, and here is submitting is in false. And this is exactly what we wanted to achieve. This is our code, how we will write API calls here. Because set timeout is actually a synchronous process and the same as API call. So here we will call some API, and on success we will commit mutation register success, and on failure register failure. In this video, you learned what are actions and why do you need them inside Vuex. So this is important to remember that when we want to trigger mutation, we are writing commit, and when we want to trigger action, we are writing dispatch. This is the main difference. The second difference is that for mutations, we can't write asynchronous code inside, so it is always synchronous. And inside actions, we can write asynchronous code because this is exactly the purpose of our actions. In previous video, you learned what are actions inside Vuex and how to use them, and we created our first register action. But we use set timeout inside, and would be nice to use real request for our API. So let's do it in this video. Now we want to change our register action to use real API. And the first question is, what is this API? So to check the API request, you can always jump in demo real world IO, and here inside network, click what you want. For example, I want to know the API URL for sign up. This is why I'm clicking here sign up, and here we have users request. As you can see here, we get a request to conduit production ready IO/API/users. And this is a post request, and here we need to pass a payload, which means if we will write some data inside, which should be actually valid data, and I'm clicking sign up, you can see that we still get an error, but here we have a user property and the data that I passed inside. So this is our URL that we will use everywhere. Now the question is how we will fetch data from our API. And for this I prefer to use Axios package. This is why you need to install this package. What is Axios? This is the most popular library in JavaScript to work with API, like to make put, posts and other requests also. So here we need to write yarn add and then Axios, and it will install Axios package inside our project. Now we can use it directly. Actually, if you want to know how to use it, just Google Axios and open the official library. And here there are examples how to use it. So first of all, installing, just npm install or yarn install. And here are examples. So we simply write Axios get if we want a get, or Axios post if we want post. But actually, we won't use it directly like here, with importing just Axios inside our file, because we want to create first the wrapper. And there are two questions, of course, why we need a wrapper and what we will write there. So normally I prefer to wrap such things like libraries for fetching inside wrapper in order to change them later if I need to. So if at some point you want to use some other libraries and not Axios, then you can simply make it. Also, it is nice if you want to do some additional configuration, then you can use your wrapper. So here, as you can see, the package is already installed, and I want to create here inside source new folder. And here will be folder API, and inside we will write all code which is related to our API. And the first thing that we want to create is Axios configuration. So here will be new file, and let's name it axios.js. So this is a wrapper for Axios. You can name it whatever you want, like maybe fetcher. And here I want to import Axios from Axios. And now I want simply to export default Axios. And you will understand why I wrote like this in a minute. So now we can add here some configuration for Axios if we want to, and then everywhere we will use Axios from this file and not from library like on the top. So here we created our Axios fetch library, and now we want to create additional file inside the API to work with auth. Why is that? I have an idea which works quite nice, that we need to mirror our store inside the API, which means here we have different modules, and normally these are entities, and we can create the same modules inside API folder. For example, we are working with auth, and we can create auth module for store and auth module for our API. So we will write in that file everything which is related to auth. We can do the same, for example, with article, but of course we can't mirror it like always. So for example, here we can create two pages like create article, edit article, but in API it will be simply article, and we will write everything which is related to article there. So let's start here from auth.js. Inside here we will store all our requests which are related to authentication. So how we will use it? First of all, we need to import Axios here, and it will be from add, then API, then Axios. So we don't write it from npm package, but from our local Axios. And now we want to create new method register, which will get some credentials. This is the data that we will give inside our component. So here are credentials. And here inside this function, we want to make our request. So we return axios.post, and you saw here this request. As you can see here, we have HTTPS conduit production ready IO. But just imagine that in every place we need to copy paste this full URL. It doesn't make any sense, and we want to create base URL. So we can write here just /users/ for example, login, if it is login, or if it is registered, then just /users. And here will be an object with property user, and here will go our credentials. And you might ask why I wrote it like this, because here, as you saw in the example, we have a property user, and inside everything that we got from the form. Which means in this method register, when we call it, we need to pass our form data. So we successfully created our register method, and now we need to export it. And I prefer to export as a default the object with all methods that I created. So here we're adding to export default our register method. And now we can use our API for auth inside our store. So let's jump back in store modules auth, and here on the top we can import what we want to from our API. So here we can name it auth API, and it will come from add API/auth. So we imported this helper, and this is exactly the idea. So we separate completely the logic with working with APIs inside that API folder, and everywhere we're using only these helpers. So here we have our register action, and we can actually commit everything here. And now we want inside the register to return a promise. And we want to resolve it at the different places, and we want in that places to do commits. This is why we want here a promise. So for this we need to write return new promise, and here will be resolve, because we need for now only resolve. And here we will have our auth API dot register, and inside we are passing credentials. And the question is how we are getting here credentials. And this is exactly that payload that you saw previously inside Vuex. So here inside register we have context, but we also have here data that we passed through our action. And here we have our credentials. And we can now pass them here as credentials inside register. And register method gives us back then, and then means success, and here we're getting our response. So first of all I want to console log here response, so we can check how it looks like. And also I want here to make this context commit, and here will be register success. So here is context commit register success, and I also want to pass here some data that we get back, like the response. So here I will pass response data user. Why I pass it like this? Because here in preview, actually these are errors, but if we will register with some real data, which will be valid, you can see our request, and this is our response. So inside response there is a property user, and this is our current user data. So this is why here I have response, then data, and then .user. So we are committing register success with this data that we got from our API. And actually here it's not API, but not auth, but auth API. And after this, we want to resolve our request. So here I am resolving response data user. And I will show you in a second why I want to resolve it here. And if you have an error, you want catch. So here after then, you want .catch, and here we get some result. So if we have errors, first of all, I want to console log these errors. So here is result errors, and here we just have a result. And after this, we want actually to commit failure mutation. So for this, we are doing context commit, and here will be our register failure, and we will create it in a second because we don't have it now. And here will be result, response data, and .errors. Why I am writing like this? Because as you saw previously, when we are getting some errors like backend validations, it is written inside data with .errors. This is why I wrote here data.errors. Now we want here to copy this register success mutation and create our register failure mutation. So here is our mutation, and we want to set is submitting to false because we got the response from backend, and yes, it is fail, but we don't need is submitting property anymore. So this is exactly how we normally are writing communicating with backend. So here we have some API call, we have then here we want to commit something, and we want to give some data back in order to subscribe to them in the component, and I will show it in a second. And here we have catch, and if we have an error, we want to commit our failure. So as you can see, we don't have any errors, so let's check in browser. So here we are on register page. Nothing is broken here. We're clicking sign up, and as you can see, we already get the error. So here at least our store made this request. So here you can see localhost 8080/users not found. And this is obvious because here inside API auth, we have a register with /users, which means we're using the same host as it is written here. And we don't want this host, but we want this conduit URL. And this is exactly the point why I created this API Axios, because here I want to set base URL. So here we can say Axios defaults, then base URL, and here will be our base URL. So we can copy everything from here with the word /API also, because we want then to write only /users. So this is now our base URL, and if we will reload the page and click again, As you can see here, the base URL now is correct, HTTPS production ready IO API users. And here is result error, which means we got some backend validation. And actually, with this API, if you are getting 422 error, this means that your data that you give inside is not valid. So here, obviously, it's not valid because it's an empty object. And here we're getting the backend validation, like error, email can't be blank, password can't be blank, and username can't be blank. So let's take a look on our mutations. Here is Redux tab. Sorry, not Redux tab, but Vue tab. And here we have Vuex. And you can see that we have register failure, and this is our payload here. And here is our state. So we have here is submitting in false, because this is the only thing that we change inside our module. So here we have failure and is submitting is false. But what is more important here, we have payload with backend validation. And this is this code. So here inside catch, we wrote this result response data errors, and we wrote them inside payload. This is why we can use them now, for example, in other places or inside our component. And now I want to show you why I wanted to resolve here the data of the user. So if we will jump back inside our register view, you can see that we are making here this store dispatch register. And actually we can return the promise back. And now this is exactly what we did. So here we returned the promise. This is why here is return new promise. So we can write here then, and here is some result. And let's just console log this result here. So here is a result from register action, and here is comma result. And as you can see here, we will never come in this component in then if we get an error. So errors we want to fix or to cover inside our modules in Vuex. But if we will give some valid data to register user here, and then I will clean everything, and we're hitting here sign up, we still get an error. So something is not valid. Okay, this can't work because for now we don't pass anything in this object because we didn't bind our form yet. So how we can use it? We can simply say here in dispatch register our credentials. And of course it will be not valid, and this is only for testing purposes. So I want here to pass email, and it will be some email that does not exist yet. Then we want here username, and it should be some username, and then password. So here is our password. And this is only for testing purposes because we want to see if we are getting here with success. So now let's reload the page and try again. We actually don't need to fill anything here because we predefined our data inside JavaScript. And as you can see here, we are getting our response, and this is 200 response. So here is post with correct data, and we got our response from public API. And here is the response and the result inside our component, which means for us, our actions from Vuex are actually promises. And this is super comfortable because you always want to do something inside your component after your action is successfully finished. This is why we wrap all our actions in new promise. And now here we can react, for example, and redirect user to the other page. But this is the point for other video. In previous video, we created our register API call, but we did it in a very rough way. Because here in our dispatch, we simply used some data, which we wrote here, and we did not bind our form. So first of all, we need to fix this and bind the data of our form to our dispatch action. How we can do this? Actually quite easy, because we can simply write inside our component the data, which will be several properties inside this. So for example, here on the top after name, we can create data property. And just to remind you, data should always be a function and not a property of the object. So here we want to return several fields of the form. We want here to have email, and at the beginning it will be empty string, then password, it will be always empty string, and username, also empty string. So our properties are there, and now we just need to bind these three properties with vModel. And just to remind you, vModel is two-way data binding, which means we get the value inside input when we change the property, and we get the value from input in the property every time when we change it inside our input. So we can simply say here vModel equals, and here will be username, and then I will copy paste it here, and it will be email, and then vModel for password. So in this case, we have all three vModels binded, and we simply can use them inside our dispatch. So we can remove this code and write here this email, then for username it will be this username, and for password this password. Now let's check if it's working. So let's reload our page and jump inside register. Now if we will write something inside our form and click submit, we should get correct data inside our request. So let's check this out. Here on the bottom you can see our user request, and here is our payload. And as you can see, we have all fields from our form. So this is exactly how we can simply work with simple forms, which means you don't need any additional libraries. We simply create some data properties and we are passing them on submit. The next thing that I want to fix is to improve our reducers. So let's jump to our modules auth, and as you can see here we have only one property is submitting. Of course it's not enough for our authentication module because we want to store more information. First of all, we need to know if the user is logged in or not, and we want to store current user data and validation errors if we have any. So let's create these properties. First of all, we need is logged in property, and it will be by default null. And the question is why it is null, because from the naming I would say that this is Boolean. And actually there is an idea behind it. So by default it is null because we don't know yet if user is logged in or not. And then after we, for example, fetch current user and we know it, then we set this variable to true or false, which means this property has 3 states and not 2. Now we also need current user property, and it will be null by default because we didn't save it there yet, and we also need validation errors, and it will be also null by default. And then when we catch an error, then we will fill validation errors there. As you can see, I am writing everywhere nulls and not undefined. And actually this is the idea, so in the whole project I am sticking only to nulls. You can do the same with undefined if you want, but I don't want to use both of them in the project. So our state is ready, and now we need to update our mutations. Why is that? Because, for example, when register success is happening, we want not only to change the submitting property, but do more stuff. So first of all, I want in register start to say that state validation errors equal null. And why is that? Because let's check on the example. So here is the demo page where we are looking, and actually when we are clicking sign up, you can see that we are getting the errors after it was invalid. Now if I click once again sign up, you can see that all errors are staying here until we are getting the response from the backend. And I don't want this behavior. I want always to remove all errors at the beginning of the request and then only show them at the failure. So this is why we have here validation errors null. In success, we need to set state is logged in to true because we know that after successful register we are for sure logged in, and we want to save inside current user our payload. And the question is, what is payload? So actually here at the second parameter we have payload, and as you can see in our action on register success, we are passing is inside response data user. So actually the second parameter of the commit is our payload, and here we can use it and save this data inside our state. Now regarding failure. Actually, is submitting false is fine, but we also want to say here that validation errors equal payload, which means we also want to have here payload, and actually we are already getting it here. We are passing errors from the backend, and we want to save them inside validation errors. Now let's check if it's working as expected. And also we can remove here console logs because we don't need them, and here uncommented code. So here let's jump to the browser. We don't have any errors. Now I will write something in our form and click sign up. And now we're interested in Vue. So here inside Vuex tab, you can see that we are getting a register failure mutation. And as you can see, this is our payload, so we are getting errors from the backend. And here you can see how our state is looking after this mutation. So here is logged in is null, but the most important is validation errors. So we successfully saved them when we got failure, which means now in our whole application, in any place, we can use this data from Vuex to render errors for the user. Now let's try to make a register success. So we need some valid data here and some password. Now we're clicking sign up, and as you can see, we're getting register success. So here, of course, we have validation errors, which is not correct. So basically we need to remove them because we had them. Actually, where is register start? We don't see register start here, and this is actually a problem because register start should remove for us these validation errors. And as you can see, we don't do register start here inside our action. So first of all, we need to add it here. For example, before we are doing our request, the only thing that we need to do is say here that we want to do register start, and we don't need to pass any parameters. Now let's try again. So we just fill our form. Actually, we wanted to test it with valid data. And now we're clicking sign up. And as you can see, we have register start and failure. This is exactly what we expected. Of course, not failure, but I think I wrote something not correctly. Okay, username is already taken, so we need to change that. Now we're clicking sign up, and we're getting error again. Username is too long. Let's make it like this. And now we're getting success. So let's check our Vue tab. Here we have at the end start, which is fine because as you can see, we removed validation errors on the start. And now this is success. This is our payload on success. And here is how our auth reducer is looking like after success. So here is our current user, and in this case this is the object, because we saved inside current user all information which was the response of the backend. And now we set also is logged in to true, and now we can use all this information everywhere to access current user or is logged in, and we will do it a lot. So as you can see, we improved our mutations. It doesn't look that difficult. So basically we just save a plain state and we change it with mutations. This is it. And our action will always look like this, like the promise. And here is commit, and we're doing some commits on success and failure. Now, one more thing that we are missing is redirecting to the home page. As you can see, after we are getting register success, we don't redirect user. And actually we can do it really easy because here we returned a promise. Why is that? Because now in register Vue file, we have here then. Because this is a promise, we can use here then, and instead of this console log, we can write push to home page, for example. So let's do that. Console log we don't need anymore, and actually we don't need any data here because we are sure if we are in then, this means that this is success. So here we can use router directly with this and $router because it is injected in every component inside Vue. And here what we want to say is push, but we don't want to use direct URL, and we want to use the name of the URL. So here we can open our router index and check the name. And we want to push user to path/, which means we are using name home. So here should be an object with name home. And just to remind you, this is important to use names everywhere, then we don't need to update path like in hundreds places, but we just update a path inside our router. And this is the one-liner that will push us to home page. So let's check this out. We need to jump to the console. I will make it a little bit smaller. Now I will create the user that for sure does not exist. And here is my password. Now sign up. And as you can see, we're redirected on home page, which means it was success. And then in our component, we are getting inside then. And here we made redirect on the home page. So everything is working as expected, and our register module almost is finished. The only thing that we're missing is saving the token inside local storage. But this is the topic for another video. In previous video, we almost finished our register page, but we are missing one stuff, and this is the saving of access token. So now a little bit about authentication and how it works. So normally we can create an account. This is the demo page that we normally are testing, and after you create an account, you are signed in. Or you can just sign in here, and after that we are setting access token inside local storage. So here inside applications in development tools, inside local storage on the left, we have GBT token. The name here doesn't matter, but here is the value on the right, and this is super important. Then every time when we reload the page, you see here that we have a request to /API/user. And this is a special request to get a data of current user. And normally we are making this request only if we have here this token, because if we don't have this token, this automatically means that we are not logged in. If we have this token, this means that we saved it after register or logging in, and now we need to validate that this token is valid, and we can get current user data, and we have access to specific pages. So basically this request, and you are getting this response only because in the request here we gave authorization token. So we need to give this authorization token every time to the server. Actually, not every time, but every time when we want access to some things where anonymous user doesn't have access. But normally it's preferable to just give this token every time, and it doesn't matter if you have it or not. If not, then you are just setting empty string, and this is it. And then the backend will validate if a token is valid or not, and decide if the information that you are asking for is for you or not. For example, if you can access or remove this article, if you are an author of this article, and so on. So our goal in this video is to save this access token after registering, and we can use it later just to get current user or to make requests for backend which are authorized. So what we want to do is here on the register, after registering, when we have success, we want to set inside local storage this token. So I will open it here in application in local storage. I don't have any keys. I have one key from the Webpack dev server, but this doesn't matter. The idea is that we want to save the information that we are getting from backend. And as you can see, this was our register request from the last lesson, and this is post, and in the preview here we're getting user information. And what is interesting for us here is token. This is just a string, and we simply need to save it and use later. So the idea is that we need to save inside local storage this string. And the question is, what is the best place to do that? And actually it is for sure not mutations, because the idea of mutations that they are synchronous and normally you're writing their stateless JavaScript. The best idea for side effects, like for example fetching API, using local storage or whatever you want to do what is side effect, you need to write them inside actions. As you can see here, we already have here promise and we have here API call, and actually we can add here also local storage, which will be quite fine. So after we are inside then, so we know that it was success, we can simply write here window, then local storage, set item, and inside set, for example, with key access token, the value, and our value will be response.data, and as you can see here we have user and then token. And actually this is it. With this one-liner we can simply save the data to local storage. But of course we want to do better. Why is that? Because first of all, if you know, in JavaScript this local storage set item and get item doesn't work that good with objects or arrays, and we want to parse them first, because actually in local storage we are storing everything as a string, and it's not comfortable every time to get an object back as a string and then to normalize it like JSON parse, or every time stringify an object if you want to write something in local storage. This is why I recommend you always to create some wrapper when you are working with local storage or session storage like cookie. So we will comment this line here and create a helper to work with our local storage. So let's create here in source the folder helpers, and inside we can create, for example, persistence storage. So let's name it persistence storage.js, and actually it will be just a helper for us to work with local storage. So we want here two functions which will work exactly like functions from local storage from window. So here will be get item, and here is the key. So the key is the string what is on the left. So here, for example, the key is log level Webpack dev server. So what we want to do here is we want to wrap the code in try catch, because it is possible that when we are making JSON parse to parse the stringified content, we will get an error. So this is why here I will write catch, and here we're catching error. And then what we want to try is we are returning JSON parse, and here we are parsing local storage get item. So this is the native local storage from window, and here is our key. So we're using directly local storage here, and we're trying to parse it. If it's string, fine, we will just get a string, but if it is an object, we will get back a valid object and not a stringified object. And if we are catching an error, we want first to return null, because actually we can't return the information, and we want here to throw an error. So maybe console error in getting data from local storage. And here will be our error. So our get item is ready, and actually I want to copy it and create set item. So actually it will be really similar, but it will be set, and here we will have not only key but also a value. So we are passing some data that we want to save inside. And we also have here try catch, and here we will do not JSON parse, but actually just local storage set item. So we want to set it to local storage with the key that we passed, and here we want to do JSON stringify. So we want always to pass a string inside, just because we can save in local storage only strings. So for example, if we are passing here an object, then we will with JSON stringify this object in the string, and then we are setting it inside local storage. And if we are getting some error, we don't need to return here null, because we said we don't expect something to be returned, and we simply throw here error in setting data to local storage. So this is how our wrapper is looking like. Actually, it's not Vue specific. You can normally build such wrapper in any framework, and it is actually not related to framework at all. But now our get item and set item are safe, so we know that we've wrapped everything, we won't get any errors from local storage set or get item, and we can simply use it inside our auth. Now, what we want to do is jump back inside our modules auth, and here on the top to import our get item and set item. Actually, for now, we just need set item, and we can import it from add, then it was helpers, and then the name was persistence storage. So here is our set item, and we can use it instead of directly window local storage set item. And now this set item is working the same, so here is the key access token, and here is our data. So let's check how it works. So here we reload the page, and we need to register a user with correct credentials. And after registering, we are clicking login, and as always, something already exists. The password is too short. Okay, let's make password longer. And now we're clicking sign up, and we're on the home page. The most important here is when we are going inside application local storage, that here we saved our access token, which is this JSON stringified string. Which means now we saved it after registering, and we can use it everywhere later, and it will be saved in local storage even if we reload the page. This is exactly the idea. So until we have this access token, that means that user maybe is logged in. Why it is maybe? Because we don't know if this access token is valid or not, and we need to make backend request every time to know if the user is there and if the token is still valid. In previous video, we successfully finished our register page and created our persistence service, and with the help of it, we saved our access token. But now we are missing our backend validation errors, so let's implement them in this video. So let's check how it looks like. So here is our demo that we are checking, and when we are clicking sign up, you can see on the top we have a list of errors. But here is what? When we go to network and we click sign up, you can see here the response. So we have an error property, and inside we have our fields. And basically each key of this object, and errors is an object, is a key, for example, email. And as a value, we have an array of strings. For example, can't be blank. And then we render something like this is the key and this is the value. And if, for example, in username we have several values, like several strings, then we simply join them with empty space. Actually here not, here we just duplicate them, like and render as the list, but normally you will see them as concatenated with the space or comma. So actually like it looks here. So you have all username errors in the single line. So this is what we need to render. Now let's think how we want to proceed. So actually this will be an additional component, and yes, we can write this logic directly in our register page, but the point is that we want to reuse this component between pages. For example, inside our login page, we have exactly the same component. So here is sign in, we are getting backend errors, and here we render them. And we have the same, for example, when we create article, which means it's for sure our shared component. So let's create it now. So we can name it, for example, validation errors component, and we can create it in source components. And now we have here only hello world view, and actually this is just the test component, but we can use it. And first of all, we need to check at what file we are using it, because we want to completely change it. As you can see, we are using it in home page, and basically I will simply remove it. Actually, this is source views home. I will remove here hello world because this is just the test component. We don't need it. I will remove from here everything. So I have now just here home. Now let's jump back in our component hello world and rename it. So we want this component to be named differently. For example, validation errors. I think this is normal name for such component. And this is the shared component. So first of all, we want to change our name. And just to remind you, we used special prefix. So inside our register component, we used prefix MCV. So we will use it everywhere in every component. This is why it will be MCV validation errors. So our name is there. Now we have here props. Let's talk about props a little bit later, so I will just comment them out so we won't forget about them. The next thing that we want to specify is what we calculate. And for this, we actually need our props. So what are props? Actually, we want just, for example, inside register page to pass all errors that we have inside this component. And actually, these errors we already wrote inside our store. So here inside store modules auth, on the top you can see validation errors. And when we have register failure, we wrote validation errors inside our property. So we can use it now inside register and pass inside in the validation errors component. For this, we need to create here props, and as a parameter, first of all, we need validation errors. I think this is a nice name because we know what we are passing. And here we can specify that it should be an object. Why it is an object? Because this is exactly how it looks from the backend. So type is object and required here is true. And what I really like in Vue is props, because they are not working that good, for example, in React and Angular, and here we can specify them really simple, and we are really getting nice error messages if we don't pass something or we didn't pass the correct type. So here we are saying, okay, validation error should be an object and it is required. Now let's jump back inside our register view and try to use this component. So here we have our placeholder for validation errors, and if we want to use it, we need to write it either camel case or with dashes. And I prefer to stick to the plain HTML syntax and write everything with dashes, because actually camel case is not valid name in HTML. So this is why we want to say here MCV validation dash errors. And actually it doesn't matter if we are writing it like this or if we are writing it like this with camel case. I prefer dashes, but both variants will work. But please stick to one variant and not just type sometimes with camel case, sometimes with dashes. So here is MCV validation errors. And let's just check how it looks like. So our server is working, and when we reload the page, we are getting an error. Unknown custom element MCV validation errors. And this is super in Vue. We get error messages which are really super clear. So this is obvious. We didn't register this component. So we need to register it here on the bottom. So here we have name, and we can say here components and register our component. The question is, how do we do this? We can simply say here MCV validation errors. And now we need to import MCV validation errors from, and here will be add components, and we named file validation errors. So we just save it and reload the page. And here, of course, we are getting an error because I forget comma as always. So here now we have an error that path does not match the corresponding path on the disk, which means the file is named differently. So here I have validation errors with the big letter, and here I wrote it with small letter. So first of all, let's write it correctly, and I think we need to put .vue at the end, because in other case it won't understand it. And as you can see, we're still getting error that props. Okay, this error, as you can see, is inside validation errors. So here is the same error, I forget comma, inside export default. So let's jump back inside our validation errors and put here comma after the name. Now, as you can see, everything is working, and we're getting still here validation errors message. Let's check if I removed it. As you can see on the top, I forget to remove it. So here I remove this message, and now we have only our errors. But as you can see, nothing is rendered. And let's check what we have inside. We have here inside template hello world, and this is actually it. Because hello world is not correct, we need to change it to MCV validation errors, for example. So as you can see, our component is successfully rendered, but we are getting an error here, missing required prop validation error. So it is super clear now, we need to provide validation errors from the parent, from register Vue, inside our component. How to do this? Let's jump back inside our register Vue and check how we used our auth.isSubmitting. As you can see, this is simply a computed property, and we can do the same stuff to get validation errors. So let's create here computed property, name it validation errors, and here we simply say state.auth.validation errors, because we saved it in auth and we can use it everywhere. So now validation errors is ready as a computed property, and we simply need to render it. So here we need to pass inside validation errors. And as you can see, I am doing the same stuff here. I am using dashes and not camel case. And here we will have validation errors. And one more thing that you might want to do is to write here if condition, because actually we want to render these errors only when we have them, because it doesn't make any sense to even try to render this component if we don't have any errors. This is why here we can say if, and here will be validation errors. And we know that this condition won't pass by default, because by default we have null. And then this component won't be rendered at all. So if we will reload the page, you can see that we don't have any errors, and now inside our validation errors we can actually render our property validation errors. So let's try to render it and check how it goes. So as you can see here, we don't see anything at all because we don't have any validation errors. Now we click in sign up button, and as you can see here, we got our errors, so our component was rendered. So once again, how it is working. So here let's jump inside Vue, inside Vuex, and here you see that we have mutation register failure. And this mutation sets inside our state, inside auth, property validation errors. And as you can see here, we have some data, which means this is not null anymore. And here we have a subscription inside our register here for the property validation errors. So this is just computed property, which is subscribed to the part of the state. So when this validation errors changes, then this property also changes. And here we have if condition, so if we have validation errors, then we are passing this validation errors inside, and our component is rendered. And here we rendered our errors. So now everything is fine, we passed our errors, and we need simply to normalize them, because they are in this strange object system, and we want to do here something like an array of strings and simply render it with loop. So first of all, I would remove here this MCV validation errors, and what we can do, we can normalize these errors. So for this we can create computed property. Why is that? Because actually if you want to simply transform some data inside Vue, the easiest way to do this is through computed properties. So you already have some value inside this, like these validation errors for example, and you can create new computed property based on one or several properties inside this. So this is exactly what we are doing here. So here is computed property, and let's name it, for example, error messages. And don't forget that computed property should be a function. And here we want to return, let's return first of all empty array. And here I will console log these validation errors, so we can check how they are looking like. So here we're clicking sign up, and as you can see, this computed property is not rendering anything because we didn't use it. So instead of validation errors here, we need to render error messages. And now we will get our log. So here we're clicking sign up, and we see that this is of course observer because we are in Vue world and all our properties are observed. So actually this is an object, and we have here inside properties like email, password and username. So we need somehow to loop through each key and value and combine together these strings. So for this we can use object keys. So let's do this now. What I want to do here is return object keys, and object keys will return for us the array of email, password and username as strings. And we have object keys from these validation errors. So here we have an array of 3 strings. Now we want to map them here and get the name of each string, and then somehow generate beautiful string. So what we want to do first is to combine all our values. As you can see here, we have, for example, for username, in a value can't be blank and is too short. And I want to join them together. So for this, we can create variable messages, and this is these validation errors, and we want to get exactly values of specific name. So this is why this validation errors name. So we are getting, for example, all values from username, and then we want to join them with space. We can also do this, for example, with comma, but I think space is fine. And now we want to return concatenation of our name, which is email, and then here messages. So once again, what we are doing here. So this is the computed property which is based on these validation errors. And here we have object keys. So we return the keys of the object. Then we are mapping through every element, and this is array of strings. And now we are getting name like password, email or username. And now we are trying to get all messages of this property. So we are getting from this validation errors name these properties, and we join them in a string. So we are getting here messages is a string. And now we want to return concatenation from name and messages. So let's check if it's working. When we reload the page and we are clicking sign up, you can see that here we are getting the array of strings. Email can't be blank, password can't be blank, and username can't be blank. And here actually I want to put comma because in other case it doesn't look that good. So let's put here comma and space. And now actually it should be fine. So here we have username can't be blank, comma is too short. I think this is fine. So this is how we normalize our error messages in human readable form. Now we just need to render them in some normal way. So here actually we don't need div, but we want to make these messages like red, like here. So we need here UL and inside li, and actually we want to use here a loop. So it will be v4 loop, and we're going to get error message in error messages. So this is just simple ng4 inside Vue. And just to remind you, you need always to set a key, and this key should be unique. And actually for us, every string will be unique, so we can simply say error message here. And now inside our li, we want to render error message. So this is it. This is our whole validation errors component. Now let's check if it's working. So let's make it smaller. And as you can see, it already works, but this is actually black and we need to make it red. And for this, we need to add here class error messages. And as you can see, our class is applied and now all our error messages are rendered. In this video, we created our first shareable component, validation errors. And actually we read data from our Vuex and simply created a computed property with this data and then gave this property inside our new shareable component. Then inside it, we normalized this data and now we can reuse everywhere this component and just pass error messages from the backend inside. And this was the end of the first chapter. If you want to dive deeper in learning Vue and Vuex, then don't forget to check the link to the full course in the description box below.